So, I'm going to say this with indie films that I'm starting to notice a certain tendency with them, and this movie sort of plays into that. But yeah, I'll get into it later. Hello there, everybody. I'm Anaji, and this is FMV Reviews. And today we're going to be talking about the indie dark drama movie John and the Hole. So, the premise of this film basically is that you're following this kid, John. He lives in a fairly affluent family. They live in the middle of the woods. One day when he's playing outside, he finds that there's this like hole that goes down into the ground. I think their parents mentioned that there was supposed to be like a bunker that was supposed to be built that never got finished. But one day, John decides to put his whole family in the bunker. So he puts his mom, his dad, and his sister in the bunker, and you're basically watching as this dark, tense, indie thriller drama starts to play out. So that's the basic premise of the film. First of all, I want to say that the director here, Pasquale Sisto, he does a fairly good job here in terms of capturing like the eerie, tense vibe going on in the film. This film has an interesting opening where we're just hearing characters speak, and as the movie goes on, you really do get this tense vibe, like this dread, this sense of dread that something really bad is going to happen. And I will give him credit for doing that. I would also say I think the cinematography is really beautiful. The cinematography is done by someone named Paul Asghar or Asgur. And this movie is beautiful to look at. I mean, it's shot really well. I mean, to be honest, when I point out some of the things I'm noticing in indie films is that saying an indie film is good looking now is so, it almost feels like perfunctory now. Like so many of these, I think camera technology has gotten cheap enough where having your film look good is not really, at least in my eyes, as so far, it's not as much of a compliment as I would say it is, because it's probably one of the things I consistently see in indie films, even if the films suck, is usually they look good. But I still want to give credit here because the cinematography is pretty good. And there was a clever sequence here that was sort of a play on the aerial drone shots that we tend to see in movies like this, where it's not just an aerial drone shot for no reason. It actually kind of plays into the story, which I thought was pretty clever. And first of all, I'm gonna say the cast here is really solid. I would say they're probably one of the best things to film. The person playing the main kid, he is doing a really good job of playing sort of like he's off kilter, but there is a sort of innocence there, but there is a kind of, it's hard to read him, and it helps to build a lot of the tension in the film where you're not really sure what John is thinking in scenes, especially when he's putting people in situations that could get them hurt or could go badly. It helps to add to that tension when you're not really sure how he's feeling about it, so it makes him hard to read. But also they just have a pretty solid cast, and generally have Michael C. Hall from Dexter fame, which, to be real, as much as I love him as Dexter, I have seen him play in a lot of indie movies post Dexter, and he's just a solid actor, man. I actually like it when he's playing like more normal characters. He nails it pretty well. You got Thaisa Farmiga from American Horror Story fame. It was nice to see her here, even though I get the feeling because of how young she looks, she's going to be stuck in playing teenager roles, even though she's like 26. But yeah, she's solid here as well. Yeah, I would say in terms of compliments, I wanted to say those up front with this film. But before I get into what I think is the big problem of this, I want to say if you're liking this review, make sure to like it. I just said it already, and to subscribe to the channel. So I would say the initial premise of this film is pretty interesting, right? This kid puts his family down in this hole, but it doesn't seem very fleshed out, to be honest. So I looked to see who the screenwriter is, because maybe I'm going, hey, maybe this is like a beginner screenwriter. You tend to see that with beginner screenwriters where they usually have a really like an interesting initial premise. Sometimes it's maybe a premise that could maybe power like a short film, but if you're gonna make it like feature length, you have to add more stuff to it if to sort of justify why is the running time longer, right? I mean, and I'm not going into a movie going like, oh, this thing needs to be a certain length for me to justify the purchase I made for it. If the emotional experience is engaging enough, then I'm more than willing to forgive that. And to be honest, it kind of felt like this film should have done that. So I looked to see who the screenwriter was, and his name is Nicholas Giacobone, right? And this man has written The Revenant, which in certain ways with this film is telling about how sort of meandering it is. But he also wrote Birdman, which is a movie that, I mean, I haven't watched it in a while, but at least I remember liking, and had quite a bit to say about the entertainment industry and just art and commerce and all that. So for this film felt like maybe it was an idea he had, but he didn't really get to fully flesh out here, because there's this B story that also starts to happen during this film that once this movie's all done, like said and done, I don't really understand the purpose of that B story. To be honest, you could cut all those scenes out of the movie and it would have made the movie shorter and probably tighter. And I think I get the feeling they're trying to use it as a almost sort of like fairy tale, taking the subtext and just putting it as the direct text. But I'm not usually a fan of that, and it does not really work here. And also, I would say this, I think this movie is trying to make some sort of criticism about like white affluence. Like, you catch on very quickly that John's family is pretty rich, like the house they live in. There's several points in the movie once he has his family down in the hole where he's drawing money from their bank account, and you see that like they're pretty upper middle class. You know, it easily showed in at least one bank account that there was like $700,000 just right there. But it doesn't really do anything with that, especially in the way that this movie kind of ends. I won't spoil the ending, but the ending just kind of, it's like the writer didn't really, was either trying to subvert expectations or he didn't really know where he wanted it to go, and it just sort of ends, which is a problem that I've brought up about several indie movies that I've reviewed here, which is like they just sort of end, which sometimes for a film that works, but a lot of times for me it just does not really work. It just sort of feels like the film stops, and unfortunately this movie also suffers from that. So I would say with John in the Hole that it has the trappings of a lot of indie films, right? It has an interesting premise. It has some beautiful cinematography. It even has an interesting tone and vibe that it's doing. But ultimately, at the heart of this movie, it doesn't really know what it wants to say. And it's pretty, but it's empty. So ultimately with that, I'm going to say John and the Hole for me is a solid 6 out of 10. Usually for me, I'm finding when I'm doing 6 out of 10s, it's like a movie is technically proficient, you know, shot well, it doesn't look cheap. It's not necessarily anything bad in terms of the technicality parts of the movie, but when it comes to the emotional storytelling part or the thematic work going on in it, it just does not work. And unfortunately, this movie is one of those. So hey, if you've seen John in the Hole, let me know what you think about it. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's something I didn't see in the subtext of this film, and leave a comment down below and I'll make sure to comment back. But until then, I'll talk to y'all later. Bye.